Okay, it's Henry V time. Now, I know some of you are not feeling the love about Laurence Olivier's Henry V. It looks old-fashioned to you, looks old-timey to you. Fine. But let's say a few things. If you want to be smart about movies, you have to recognize this movie is incredibly innovative. It is a breakthrough that makes all the other Shakespeare movies we've seen possible. In an interesting way, both the Branagh and Olivier films create golden eras of Shakespeare film, making Shakespeare possible on screen at moments when it feels like people are feeling like, no, you just can't film Shakespeare. Shakespeare in the 1930s on film had been a disaster. Olivier had a supporting role in one of those plays in movies As You Like It, and he thought it was a disaster, and his performance was a disaster. Big Hollywood studios would try to do big Hollywood versions of Romeo and Juliet or Midsummer Night's Dream and just lose all the money. And the fans stayed away in droves. So Olivier has this problem of making Shakespeare work on film, really for the first time by some people's lights, and he does it in a radically experimental way. That movie looks weird to you. Things have dated. Look, color technology and effects have dated, but you know what? Be a smarter movie viewer than that. Be smarter than just stopping at the effects. Yes, that's a model of London. Yes, the color procedure in 1944 looks pretty cheesy. You know what? It's a color movie from 1944. Stop there. It's a color movie in 1944. Pretty early. When everything's black and white, this gets the very expensive color treatment. Olivier has a bunch of problems. One thing you got to know about Henry V, it's the end of a mini-series. It's the end of a 4-play series of English histories. In fact, the BBC recently did all 4 in sequence. They call it The Hollow Crown, culminating in Henry V. But Olivier's just filming Henry V, so we come in late. At the end, the triumphant upswing at the end. What has been happening for the previous 3 plays? First of all, in the first play, Richard II, King Henry V's father, the future Henry IV, steals the throne from his cousin. Bad times. He's a better king, but he shouldn't be. He's a better king than the man he stole the throne from, but he's not the rightful king, and this is a problem that works itself out through the next 2 plays, Henry IV Part 1, and, that's right, Henry IV Part 2. What is Henry V doing in Henry V Part 1 and Part 2? He's the Prince of Wales, the heir to the throne, the heir to the stolen throne. And he is behaving as badly as possible. He is not acting like the heir to the throne. He's hanging around, concealing his abilities, hanging out in bars in London with Falstaff, who's this hilarious, obese, cowardly, lying criminal. The last guy you want the prince involved with is Falstaff. Falstaff is maybe Shakespeare's most successful comic character. He's in 3 different plays. He's incredibly funny, but an incredibly bad influence. At the end of the Henry IV plays, Henry, the prince, reforms. He suddenly becomes, his father dies, and in Shakespeare's version, the prince is always planned to reform and become a good man and a good king, which means goodbye Falstaff. Falstaff is not in Henry V except off stage. We hear about his death. Everyone who films Henry V has to decide what to do with Falstaff, who's this huge and important character for the series and a huge part of the king's psychology and personal history, but he's not here. You'll see both Olivier and Branagh find different ways to get that in. So we have 3 problems that both Branagh and Olivier are going to have to solve. Shakespeare movies are box office poison. Got to do something about that. It's the end of a series. They both jumpstart Shakespeare cinema with Henry V, both of them, which means both of them have the Falstaff problem, which they need to solve in different ways. And third, there's this chorus. Henry V, the play, is wonderfully meta-theatrical. It talks deliberately about the limits of being on stage. The chorus comes on again and again, tells the audience, look, there are things we can't show you. This is just a stage in the London suburbs. Everything here is made of wood. There aren't going to be any horses. We're not putting horses on stage. So when we speak of horses, imagine you see them. And then the poetry leads the audience to imagine, to participate. Let your imaginary forces work. This is entirely unnecessary in a movie. You can see horse. You know what you do in a movie when you want to show the audience horses? You photograph a bunch of horses. It's really the way. But both Olivier and Branagh stubbornly insist on keeping these now famous choral scenes and doing something with them. Okay. A few things. Why is such an expensive movie as Olivier's Henry V happening in 1944? The answer, if you've read your Hindle, is this is Olivier's contribution to the war effort. He was not the most gifted naval aviator in England. He was the best actor in England. Now, some people will tell you Laurence Olivier couldn't fly planes. That is not true. Laurence Olivier could fly planes perfectly well. Laurence Olivier could not land planes. And that turns out to be a major skill. What he could do was act and direct. This is the first of three Shakespeare films he directs. They're all masterpieces in a way, and he's extremely experimental about it. Why is he doing this? This is part of the war effort. It's 1944. If you don't know what's happening in English history in 1944, please go check that out. They're fighting the Germans. Now, people will tell you that this film makes warfare look very sunny. It's propagandistic. Yes, this is going to be released right in time for D-Day. No. Does this movie show you the horrors of war? No. Nobody who watched this movie originally needed to be shown the horrors of war. London, England had sustained enormous aerial bombing for years. People were getting killed. No one needs to be told how ugly war is. They know. Is it propaganda? Yes. Can you make a great movie that's an artistic success? That's World War II propaganda? Yeah, apparently you can, because this one's pretty good. And you know what? Casablanca ain't bad either. And that is whether you know it or not now, is a World War II propaganda movie par excellence. Why does Bogart put Bergman on the plane to fight the Nazis? That's how important fighting the Nazis is. Casablanca tells us, more important than getting with Ingrid Bergman, and that's important. It's sunny, it's cheery, it's meant to soldiers. It's meant also to pull in a kind of traditional Englishness. This starts right in the beginning when we have that kind of wonderful spring blue sky. We have that piece of paper. If you watch that piece of paper that flips around eventually and shows us the playbill for 1600 and the famous victories of Henry V at the Globe Theatre, you will see briefly before it happens there's a subliminal moment or a little quick flash which you can easily miss that shows us the English flag. Not the British flag, not the red, white, and blue Union Jack that represents England's, Wales, Scotland, etc., but the English flag, the old school flag. It's white with a thin red cross. You can see the soldiers using it in this movie. You can see soccer fans using it at the World Cup. It's the traditional flag of England itself. That piece of paper, before it flips over, it quickly is a very quick flash of a waving English flag. We are subliminally primed to British patriotism right from jump. In the same way that he does this kind of experimental thing, Olivier does an experimental thing with Hamlet, where we briefly see Hamlet's brains right before to be, because the camera goes through his head. We're going to do the same kind of quick blink and you'll miss it thing with the English flag. And then we move into this kind of panorama. Now, you don't like that model? You don't like that model? Great. It looks cheesy. Fine. The movie's 70 years old. Technology has improved. But don't be technologically parochial. People have made great decisions with much more impoverished toolkit, and people make crappy movies with high technology now. Look at the skill, not the tools. Why are we having that image of London? Well, it's a fantasy image of London that's meant to tell the English, to connect the English with their glorious heritage. And if it doesn't look like London in 1944, that's right. London in 1944 has been extensively bombed. You can see a few. You can still see a few in that model. You can see a few of the landmarks that are still there now that got through the war and got through the fire in 1666. But a lot of that of Shakespeare's London had been destroyed twice by 1944. Once in the 1660s because of a large fire, then there's been a lot of urban renewal, and then finally with the Germans bombing things. We have the camera move, and don't for a second think of this as a theatrical movie. Olivier only directs 3 movies in his life. They're all Shakespeare movies. He's a totally cinematic every time. Yes, Hindle says he uses theatrical quotes sometimes, but he knows how the camera conventions work, and he thinks about them. He thinks in movie terms the whole time. We have that pan where we slowly follow the camera along. We pass the Globe Theater. We look at like the Rose Theater, another theater, and then double back, showing us that the camera is not to be trusted. The camera has a point of view and has its own mind and can make mistakes. And then we pan in, and we're suddenly inside the Globe Theater now. The most obvious thing is that we are watching. We start with Act 1 inside the Globe Theater, doing a kind of historical recreation. Again, this is meant to connect the audience to England's glorious history. It's not the last time a film about Shakespeare has done this. If you want to see another kind of national or traditional thing in an American movie, watch Shakespeare in Love, which also shows you the globe and gets into a kind of the glorious history of the English-speaking peoples. But we're not simply filming a play. We're filming a play, but also watch the actor king. The actor is playing the king. There are 3 distinct sections of this movie, and we should distinguish them. There is the play within a play part. There is the film about actors playing Henry V at the Globe Theater that goes on to about Act 1. Then there's the second part where you think the sets are ridiculous. We jump forward after Act 2 through the chorus. We kind of go through that curtain, and we see the kind of strange, out of proportion scenery that you think is silly. That is actually very carefully imitated from a particular medieval art book from Henry V's time. You'll see Henry suddenly has a terrible haircut. He has a medieval haircut. The first act, we're filming it in Renaissance costume, 1600 costume, like the actors would have worn. Then we're moving back to some kind of recreation of medieval costume, terrible medieval haircuts with a bad bowl cut. And that's the strange scenery that is meant to look like kind of like medieval art before we had our ideas of perspective. So we're doing that. Finally, in the battle sequence, we move into kind of untrammeled Hollywood cinematic realism where things look like what they look like. We have that great cavalry charge where the French army starts moving very slowly and faster as we track them. Okay. But first of all, those are 3 distinct phases, and they should be sorted out, and different things are happening. One thing to notice in the first part is we follow our audience and actors a long time before the play within a play or play within a film of Henry V starts. There's that little moment we finally see very late the actor who's going to play King Henry, and we see him do a little cough right before he goes on, which suggests to us that reminds us that he's an actor playing a part, that this is not Henry, this is just a tribute. This is someone playing King Henry. It's going to be a complicated meta-cinematic thing going on here. Okay, now, the other thing. I've told you about this is a movie about the war effort. It is. Don't turn that into the explanation of everything. Every single thing Olivier does is not about the war effort. Some things, it is very important, though. Some speeches just get lost. The speech before Harfleur, where the king threatens to kill everybody and their mother and their children and grandfather, where we're going to spit babies on pikes, violate maidens, dash out old people's brains. That speech is gone, because that's not in keeping with the British war effort or British propaganda. That's not how Englishmen are supposed to roll in wartime. In the same way, the scene where the king roots out traitors in his own midst just before he sails to France, that is gone too. English traitors we're not going to talk about that. And we've turned the Battle of Agincourt into a sunny spring-like day. It's filmed on location in Ireland. You have to film it further away from the battlefield. There's a story that, in fact, at one point they actually stopped the battle scene because there were distant warplanes visible in the sky. They stopped, watched the aerial battle. Okay. Went back to their fake battle. And then, of course, there's the famous loop back at the end where we close back in the Globe Theater. Now, there are things I don't like about this movie. There are things I don't like about both movies. I think both have trouble. For my money, neither one gets the set of clowns just right. We have two sets of clowns for both in the play. We have the group that are the kind of Herod legacy Falstaff clowns, Falstaff's old sidekicks, who in the Olivier are kind of campy and done in a kind of stage way, and it's about being colorful and whatever, and I don't find it very funny. Maybe people used to. In in Brandon's version, those characters don't seem to have ever been funny at all. It's all very grim and they're very poor and it's all very dark. Whatever. There's neither what sometimes artists do take two different things, and neither of them works. There are more than two ways to approach those characters. There's also a different set of clowns, our national ethnic comedy clowns. Ha ha ha, that guy's Irish. Ha ha ha, a Scottish guy, and of course Llewellyn, the funny Welshman. You know, funny Welshman. Shakespeare stoops to ethnic humor sometimes. It's ethnic stereotypes that have died out mostly in the last 400 years. The obsession with the Welsh, not really a live thing today. Okay, and watch in the end, here's the thing about that last battle scene. It is almost entirely out of the script. The script doesn't show the battles. It can't. They don't have the they don't have the capacity on the Elizabethan stage to enact these battles. They don't have hundreds of extras. This is Olivier, more than anybody who's ever done this play, has all the resources the chorus complains about not having. He has hundreds, nay, thousands of extras. He has all the horses he wants. He can have the armor. He can have all the scenery and all the costumes he wants. He can go out on location as long as he stays away from the actual war zone. He's got it all. And up front, his chorus tells us he doesn't. But then in the battle scene, he does. That's all new stuff. Everything with the horses, almost all of that is, the language is all from Shakespeare, but in between the languages is all this stuff. And you'll see again, Olivier, one of the most athletic of Shakespearean actors, a big jock in lots of ways, turns Henry V into a big, glorious jock. Does this celebrate war? Maybe, but this is a movie made by a country that had tried to stay out of a war for a long, long time, much too late by most standards, and had been mired in a brutal war for, at this point, 6 years. Nobody needs Laurence Olivier in 1944 to tell them war is terrible, but you will see a little of it in Act 5, Scene 2 with the Duke of Burgundy speech. Okay. That's it for now. Next time, we'll talk about Brenna. Thanks.